Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Dwani Pandya, and I am the IT Director for the Office of Early Childhood. This afternoon, our agency is presenting a webinar on the background checks information system to review the areas that are proving to be challenging to users to ensure all users understand how to utilize the system. We are joined this afternoon by Michael Curley, our Chief Legal Counsel, and Deborah Johnson, our Director of Licensing. I am pleased that we are able to provide closed captioning in 5 languages this afternoon. To access closed captioning, look for the CC button on the bottom right of your screen as shown on the screen here. Further, click on the settings gear icon next to the CC button to change and set the language of your choice. During the course of the webinar, you will have the opportunity to ask questions to our agency by posting them in the Q&A section. And your questions will be answered in a moderated fashion at the end of the webinar if time permits. Please know that a lot of the questions you may have may be answered by Mike Curley during the course of the webinar. We will do our best to answer as many questions as possible if we have time. We also have an FAQ section on our website that lists the answers to the frequently asked questions. Thank you so much for joining us. And with that, Michael Curley, I hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Dwani. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today on the Background Check Information System, BCIS. I believe this is the 3rd webinar we've done in the last year covering OEC background checks, so we'll get some updates today. I wanted to start by just acknowledging that, we know there are still a lot of challenges that child care centers are facing at this time. The past 2 years, getting through the pandemic and still dealing with a lot of challenges related to the pandemic. There are a lot of staffing challenges, and we know that the background checks process can add a complicated part to hiring and staffing. And I want to acknowledge that, there can be some complicated steps in this background check process, and that's why we're doing our best to provide as much information and support as we can. So these webinars are part of that process, trying to provide information and go over some common challenges. And I'm going to go over today a number of ways that childcare programs can reach out to OEC if they're having challenges with this process, and where to find information and guides. So as I said, this is a brief agenda of what we'll cover today. There are a few different codes and numbers, so that can get confusing. So we'll look at those just to clarify the purpose of each. And as I said, we'll look at our website that has a lot of information to help answer questions and understand how to use BCIS. We'll go over some common issues, some key takeaways. We'll talk about how BCIS will soon be used in licensing inspections. And we'll do a brief BCIS demo. And as Dwani mentioned, time permitting, we can respond to some questions that you can put in the chat. So as I said, there's a few different numbers, and these 3 different numbers sometimes can get confused where they go or how they're used. So we just wanted to include this. And before I get into this level of detail, I also wanted to mention that this webinar will be posted on our website along with the presentation slides. So you can refer to this on the website. And when we look at the website in a moment, I'll show you where that is. So the first number that we have listed here is the BCIS ID number. And that is shown in the top left of the screen when an individual who's getting their background check is logged into the background check information system. And I'll show that when we do a little demo later in the presentation as well. And there's an example here of what a BCIS ID number looks like. Another code that's part of the process is the CCHRS service code. And that code is from the state police system called CCHRS. And when going through the BCIS portal and in selecting which type of facility you're working in, then you're provided the correct service code to enter in the state police system. And again, we'll go through that in the demo. And this is what the service codes look like. And then once you've entered your service code and enrolled in the state police system, CCHRS, then you're provided an applicant tracking number. And that number looks like this example at the bottom here. So we've seen sometimes that folks sometimes get confused which number is used where. So we just wanted to try to clarify these three different numbers. And again, I'll go over this more in the demo. As I mentioned, there's a lot of information available on the OEC website. And we've sent links out to the website. And if you just go to the OEC website, you can always navigate to this by selecting background checks. And it'll take you to the background check section. And there's information on BCIS. There are guides for how to use BCIS as a program administrator, how to use BCIS to get a background check. And each of those sections has a guide with step-by-step instructions and a video that walks through the process. There's also frequently asked questions. And as I said, we have previous webinars posted here with the presentation slides, and we'll also post this webinar recording on the website with the slides from today's presentation. A particularly important section that I want to highlight is the BCIS status descriptions. This explains the different statuses for OEC background checks that will show on your program roster, and more detail about what each status means. When you're in your roster and you scroll your mouse over the status, the description will also show up for you in a little pop-up box. But at this section of the website, you can see all the different statuses and what they mean. And what's really the goal for everyone that needs a background check is to get into a current background check status. That means you've completed all the components of the background check and your background check is good for 5 years with OEC. So one other status that's important to be aware of is the work supervised status. And what that means is that someone had their criminal results returned, but some other component of the background check is still pending. Because what the state and federal law requires is all of the components of the background check have to be completed. But before someone can begin work, they have to have at least the criminal results. So once we get those criminal results back, a person can go into a work supervised status. But if they have any other components pending, and that those other components could be the DCF registry check, it could be checks in another state that they've lived in the past 5 years. If there's any other component pending, then they stay in a work supervised status until everything is complete. And work supervised simply means that they must be supervised by another staff member who has a fully completed background check, someone else in the program who's in a current status in BCIS. So they should have someone else in the room with them when they're working with children who's in a current status. And then the other statuses really relate to kind of the progress of submitting information, and we need to have the fingerprints submitted and the DCF and FBI forms. So all of that can be done and scheduled through BCIS. And as you go through the process, your status will update accordingly. So again, we have a lot of information here. I really encourage anyone involved with background checks to go through this to get questions answered and learn how the process works. And then if you still have questions or you run into issues, sorry for my dog barking. If you run into issues, you can reach out to us at our support center. And that could be issues with logging in, if you get an error message in BCIS, or if you're just having any other question or difficulty with the system, you can reach out to us at our support center. And the link to do that is here. And you can open a ticket, and that ticket gets tracked so that we ensure you get a response and that your issue gets resolved. We also have Jill Marini, who's our background checks manager in the legal division, and she's been extremely helpful working through issues with providers, and she can schedule to go through your roster and any questions that you have on staff, and you can reach out to her directly at jill.marini, M-A-R-I-N-I, at ct.gov. A common challenge that we've heard is getting access to fingerprinting. We've discussed in the prior webinars and messages that we have partnered with United Way 211 Childcare to provide fingerprinting services for childcare programs. And a childcare program can schedule a session to have staff fingerprinted at their site. And to do that, you can reach out to United Way at fingerprinting@ctunitedway.org. It's very important to follow the deadlines and the process that they lay out once you schedule a session, because the information for everyone who's on the schedule for that session has to be uploaded to their device before they go out to the site. And then they go back to their central location in Rocky Hill to transmit the information to the state police. And that has to be done at that one location through a secure transmission site. So sometimes if they don't have all the information they need in advance, sometimes people are not able to be fingerprinted. And people ask, like, why can't they just add the information that day? And it doesn't work that way because they have to have the information uploaded to the device before they leave Rocky Hill. So it's really important to read the information they send you if you've scheduled a session at your childcare center, and make sure that they have all the information they need for the staff that are going to be fingerprinted that day in advance. Here's just a few common issues that we're seeing, and ensuring that the information is entered into the system accurately is really important. We see a lot of issues with names that are just spelled different ways, or nicknames. So it's important to make sure that the full name is entered, and so that it matches what's in our system. And if you're trying to add someone to a roster and they're not coming up, it may be that our system has their name written one way and it's being entered a different way. So if you're not finding someone that you believe should be in our system, you can reach out to us so we can research that and confirm. Another common issue that we've seen is when someone is invited to BCIS and they create their account, the program administrator needs to go back to the invitation to add that person to the roster once they've created their account. And we've seen some issues where that second step is not happening. This is going to be updated. There's a few updates to our system that are going to happen at the end of this week. And once this update happens, then when the person creates their account, they'll automatically be attached to the roster that invited them to create their BCIS account. But until then, that second step of going back to attach them to the roster is necessary. And I'll talk about this a little more during the demo as well. It's also important to make sure that staff complete all the steps. So we've seen quite a bit of staff who start the process and then they stop in the middle, or they get to one of the last steps and then they don't complete all of the steps. Especially we've seen this where they're selecting how they're going to submit their fingerprints. And when a 2-on-1 childcare session is scheduled and you're having 2-on-1 come to your childcare center to fingerprint staff, they can make appointments directly when you set that up. And if that's the case, if you already have an appointment scheduled with them, there is an option in BCIS to select that 2-on-1 childcare fingerprints were already submitted or already scheduled. And I think sometimes when people get to that step, they're not sure what to click and they just stop, and then the submission won't be complete. So it's important that if that's how they are going to submit their fingerprints and they already have an appointment scheduled, they select that option in that step. And again, just making sure to double check spelling, dates of birth, email addresses, making sure that the information that's entered is accurate. All right, so here are some key takeaways from today's presentation and some important announcements. We sent out an email on Friday to all licensed childcare centers, group childcare homes, and center-based care for kids childcare providers to make these announcements, and I want to cover these today as well. We try not to send things out on Friday afternoons, but it just seems to work out that way. So if you didn't see that message, I would check your email for an email from OEC licensing on Friday. And I'm going to cover them today as well. So the first here is that the OEC will continue to cover the fingerprint processing fees of $88.25 per person for an additional year through June 30th, 2023. So this has been extended a number of times. Up until just last week, we had extended this to June of 2022, but now it has been extended an additional year to 2023. So this is a really helpful benefit for providers and staff that this fee is going to continue to be covered by federal funding through the OEC. Next, as of July 1st, 2022, paper fingerprint cards will no longer be accepted for OEC background checks. The paper fingerprint cards have always caused a lot of issues. There's a tremendous amount of rejections with the paper fingerprint cards that it's far less with digital fingerprints. And there's a lot of delays that are caused with paper fingerprint cards with mailing and manual processing. So we are moving away from the paper fingerprint cards completely and relying on digital fingerprints. So as of June 30th, 2022, OEC will no longer accept paper fingerprint cards, and we will stop sending out the blank fingerprint cards as of April 30th. Again, I mentioned it's really important when you are using United Way for fingerprinting to follow the timeline and make sure that all the information is submitted in advance. Another important piece to ensure that's entered accurately is the 5 years of address history in BCIS. If there's not a full 5 years of address history, then all the components of the background check won't be able to process completely, and they won't be able to get into a current background check status. And again, as I mentioned in the beginning, ensuring that the correct codes and numbers are used will allow the background check to be completed. And if there's confusion about that, you can refer to this presentation or reach out to us to confirm. So this message was part of what we sent out on Friday that will begin using BCIS rosters during licensing inspections. And I'm going to ask our licensing director, Deb Johnson, to say a bit more about this.
Thanks, Mike. I don't know if you can see my picture here. I am here and I might show up all of a sudden. Good afternoon, everyone. BCIS, let me take one step back. In the past, if you remember, programs didn't have an easy way of verifying whether the background checks were completed. And now BCIS is that way to do that. Now any program can go into the system and verify that a background check has been completed or is pending or whatnot. And that is the way a program will know whether a staff person can begin to work. So we strongly encourage programs to become familiar with BCIS and its use. Two big things would be to confirm or ensure that all of your staff are linked to your program. And you can do that by going in and looking at your program roster. And if a staff is not listed there, then you know they're not linked to your program, and that can be corrected. So make sure all your staff are linked to your program, therefore they're on your roster. And then before staff are working directly with children, make sure their status for that staff person is either current, or if they're not current, they're work supervised, which would mean they're able to begin working with children under direct supervision of another staff person who has a current status. Direct supervision meaning they're in the same room as that staff person. This BCIS is also a tool for licensing staff. And so beginning July 1st of this year, licensing staff will be routinely using BCIS and looking at the rosters in BCIS for programs they're visiting. And this will help us verify compliance with background check requirements. So if you, knowing that we're going to be doing this, look at your roster, and if the staff are all current or work supervised in the program, there shouldn't be any issues, and it will be easy for you to demonstrate compliance with that requirement. And it would also expedite the inspection process. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks very much, Deb. I think, yeah, it really highlights, you know, one of the huge pieces of progress that we've made and what this system allows. In the past, there wasn't really a way for programs to see the status of their background check and make sure that they had everyone complete and current in the system. And that's what this BCIS system gives us, is the ability to do that. So it's really important to make sure that you're going into the system, confirming your roster has all of your staff that are either providing care to children or have any unsupervised access to children, that they're on the roster and in a current or work supervised status. And if there are questions about that, as I said, reach out to us through the support center. call us in the legal division or reach out to Jill Marini, and we can help resolve any questions or issues to make sure your full roster has all your staff in current or work supervised status. Okay, so now I'm going to pull up a demo version of BCIS. So we can see what it looks like, and we'll see some of the things that we've talked about so far. First of all, I mentioned earlier that whenever you log into BCIS, you'll see a BCIS ID number in the top left corner. So this is true for administrators or staff. Anyone who logs in will see the BCIS ID of that account listed in the top left here. And if you're an administrator that has access to multiple locations, you can click your roster and you can see your different locations listed so that you can toggle through the location that you're working on. And then your roster will show with your staff and their status. And anyone who's in a current status will not be highlighted with any color. If someone needs a background check, meaning that they have not had a comprehensive background check in the past 5 years, and that's not confirmed in our system, then they'll be highlighted in red. And then if anyone is within 6 months of the expiration date of that 5-year period, they'll be highlighted in yellow. And if they are in one of those statuses, either they need a background check or they're approaching within 6 months of expiration, then this request background check button will show on the right side so that the program administrator can send them a request to complete their background check. When it's necessary to add someone to your roster, you can click the Add Person button, and then you can search by their first name, last name, date of birth, and either zip code or the last 4 digits of their social security number. So you use one of those, either the zip code or the last 4 digits of the social security or individual tax ID number. So that's one way to search, by entering that information. Another way to search is if they've already created a BCIS account and they have their BCIS ID number, you can enter that here and search that individual based on their BCIS ID number. So I'm going to do that now with a test staff member. So if you've entered their information and they match someone in our system, or if they've already created a BCIS account and they give you their BCIS ID number, you can enter that, and then you can locate that person, and then you can select the roster that you want to add them to. Select that they're either a staff member or volunteer. The other roles that are listed are for family child care homes. So the 2 roles in a child care center, a group child care home, or a license exempt care for kids child care provider are staff or volunteer, and then you can select to add them to the roster. So this is the second step that I mentioned earlier. Once they've created their account and you have their BCIS ID number, that's when you can add them to your roster. If someone has never created an account, when you search for them, then they wouldn't come up here. And then you can just send them an invite. So that would be the first step. So when no record is returned, then you can, again, select the roster, a staff member, and enter their email address to send them an invite. Once they've created an account and logged in, they'll have a BCIS ID number, and that's when you can search them again to add them to your roster. Again, there is an update that will go through at the end of this week that will automatically attach the person to the roster when you've invited them. So then they would show up on your roster, and as you can see, I invited this test user 4. So now I have a new person on my roster, and then I can request for them to submit their background check information. They're highlighted in yellow here because their background check will expire within 6 months. And so that's why I can submit the background check request. You can also download the entire roster as an Excel spreadsheet or a PDF file by clicking these buttons. Another just important note to remember is if you don't see all of your staff, you may need to select more items per page so that you can scroll down. This roster only has a small amount, but for larger rosters, you may have to increase this number to see the full roster or scroll to the next page. So just going to take a moment now to sign out so that I can sign in as a individual staff member. So once the invitation or background check request is sent to the individual, they'll receive an email at the email address that's associated with their BCIS account and be able to log into BCIS. And when they log in, they'll see these fields that they need to enter their demographic information, any alias, their address history. So it's very important, as I mentioned before, that they enter this information, use their full name, enter their correct date of birth. Again, the social security number is not a required field. It is helpful to enter, but if it's not available, there is an option to select unavailable. It's extremely important that each staff member enter full 5 years of address history. Another update that will be in the system this week is that this counter will show in green when they've entered 5 years, when they've entered 60 months of address history. The counter currently shows how many months have been entered, but now the color will change to green when more than 5 years have been entered. And if you have a staff member that you're waiting for them to get into a current status and you're not sure why, I think this is an important thing to double check to make sure that they've entered the full 5 years of address history, because that can prevent the background check from being completed. So once they've entered all their demographic information, they can click the background check tab. And then they need to confirm the terms and conditions, authorize the DCF check by entering their name to sign here, read through the FBI privacy notices, and again, enter their name to sign. And then this is another area where there's we've seen some folks get stuck. So once they go through the terms and conditions and the 2 required forms, they get to this 4th step where they select how their fingerprints will be submitted. So the first part of this process is just to select what type of facility they're working. And then once they've selected that, the service code will appear below. So they need to take this service code and go to the CCHRS website. So that's a separate website, the state police website that's also required. They need to enroll in that system in order to submit their fingerprints. I mentioned in a previous webinar that we are working with the state police to connect the two systems so that it won't be necessary to go to the separate site. But we got a recent update, and it is going to be a significant amount of time for that development. So that won't be available in the next several months. I would say likely in 2023, not 2022. So in the meantime, it's necessary to go to the state police site, enter this service code, and then enter their demographic information. And then that site provides the applicant tracking number. So then you would return to this page and enter the applicant tracking number here that was provided from CCHRS. And then I talked before about selecting one of these options. If you have a 2-on-1 session at your childcare center and you've already booked appointments directly with United Way for that session, then this third option is the correct option to select because there's already an appointment scheduled with 2-on-1. A lot of folks that did that weren't sure what to select here and were getting stuck, so that's the correct option to select. If they don't have an appointment yet and they need to schedule an appointment at 2-on-1, they would select this first option, and then it would allow them to go to the next page to schedule their appointment, and it'll show them the available dates and times. If none of those dates and times will work or are too far away or too far in the future, there is the option to get fingerprinted at a police department or state police troop. It's very important to reach out to the police department that you're planning to go to confirm what their schedule and policy is for fingerprinting. Every police department has a different policy and schedule, and many of them charge an additional fee for collecting the fingerprints. So it's important to reach out and confirm all that information. I didn't mention when we looked at the website that we have posted a list. One of our support center staff actually reached out to every police department in Connecticut to gather the information about their schedule and fingerprinting policies and fees. So we've posted a list on our website under background checks and fingerprints that lists each police department and has information about their fingerprinting services. We're also including on that list which police departments can submit digital fingerprints directly to the state police and which police departments do not provide that service. Most police departments do submit directly digitally to the state police, so those can continue to be used after July 1st for OEC background checks. But the police departments that only offer paper fingerprint cards cannot be used after July 1st for OEC background checks. And we're going to continue to edit this list to make it a little more user-friendly, but it is available on our website now. And you can see the police departments that are highlighted in red do not currently offer digital submission of fingerprints, so they should not be used for OEC background checks. And where this is posted on the website, it also indicates that this was created in March of 2022 and is subject to change. So I strongly recommend reaching out directly to the police department before going to get fingerprinted to confirm what their policy is and their schedule for fingerprinting. There are some police departments that offer fingerprinting services to non-residents of the municipality. So we have that indicated here as well. And some only offer that service to residents of that city or town. And I just wanted to point out where that list is located on the website. So it's under fingerprints and background checks. And if you scroll down to the bottom, there's this list here for fingerprinting at state police troops or local police departments. And again, make sure to call the police department directly before you go and encourage your staff to do that. And when you click here, you can download that spreadsheet directly. So that was a lot of information. I think we do have some time for some questions. So, Duani, do we have any questions in the chat?
Yes, Mike. Let me, so there was one question that was around requesting a copy of the background report. Like, is there a way for someone to download a copy of their background report?
So we get this question pretty often, and it is listed in our questions and answers. OEC cannot provide copies of background check documents that are submitted or background check results. So BCIS is the way to confirm if the background check was completed based on the BCIS status. State police also get that question if they can get copies of fingerprints that are submitted or the results. And we're not allowed to provide copies of the documents. So BCIS is the way to confirm that information. And if there's additional information that's needed for an accreditation organization or otherwise, you can reach out to us. And we do have sometimes a template letter that we can provide to confirm the information that was part of the background check.
Mike, Duani, I apologize. I just wanted to jump in with one question because it might address a couple of the questions. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about the timing. I know that programs are having challenges related to staffing, so there's some urgency to get staff to a point where they can be working in the classroom. And perhaps you can give an idea of when someone first goes into BCIS, does what they need to do in the turnaround time.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's always been a big question on everyone's mind. And we've talked about, you know, what an improvement there's been from in the past when it was taking 4 to 5 months to get results. There's really been incredible improvement to the way the process is working now. So currently, when someone goes into BCIS, submits their forms, and schedules their fingerprinting appointment, from the time the fingerprints are submitted, OEC can get the fingerprint results within 24 to 48 hours. And then those are input into BCIS, usually the same day or the next day. So within a few days of submitting the fingerprints, going to your fingerprint appointment, you can get into a work supervised status. The other components can take a little bit longer. The DCF check typically is returned within a week. There's a small percentage that take longer than that, maybe 2 to 3 weeks. And then the out-of-state checks are the components that take longer. When someone has lived in a different state in the past 5 years, we also need to complete checks in that state directly. And so we have a 45-day time frame for those checks. So when someone has lived in another state, they may stay in a work supervised status longer. But once all the components come back, that's when they would update to a current status. So I would say someone who's lived in Connecticut for the past 5 years, the majority of people can get their full background check within a week to 2 weeks. And someone who's lived in another state, they can go into a work supervised status within a matter of a few days, but the out-of-state checks will take longer, probably a few weeks at least.
Okay, and then Mike, there are a couple of questions that revolve around if someone has done a background check through the public school system within the past 5 years, do they need to be checked again for the early childhood work?
Yes, this is a very common question, and it is necessary to do an OEC background check, even if you've done a background check for a public school district. We are in communication with the State Department of Education and the legislature, and we're looking at possible changes to the process and the law. But there are also federal laws involved in these processes, so it's a very challenging problem to solve. But currently, even if you have a background check as a public school teacher or as a bus driver, if you also are going to be working in a program where an OEC background check is required, you need an additional background check, because we can only confirm a background check that was processed through OEC. And so there are some folks where if you're working in a program that requires both, or if you're working in 2 different locations where both of those background checks are required, those people do need to complete multiple background checks.
Okay, thank you. And then that also goes with the university checks. If they have had their own checks done for the university or college, is a similar answer that they would need a check done through OEC.
Correct. So any background check that's required by OEC, the background check has to be done through OEC, and we can't accept one that's been done outside of OEC. Having said that, a background check that's done through OEC can be used for any OEC purpose. So if someone is a child care staff member, a child care center staff member, and then they want to apply for a family child care home license, they could use the OEC background check that they already completed, or vice versa.
And some people have questions around changing their information on the roster. So if they notice some misspellings or errors, what would be the easiest way to reach out to OEC for that?
Yeah, so if someone wants to edit their own information, they can log into their own BCIS account to update that information. There is a step for security that asks to verify their date of birth when they log in. And if they get stuck at that step, they do need to reach out to us at the support center to get that corrected. But once they've logged in and they can access their own profile, they can update their own information if there's an error there.
Oof, this is bad. My Teams meeting just stopped all of a sudden.
Okay, are we not live? It still says live for me.
Mike, I have another question.
Go ahead.
Someone wants to know, can you clarify when a public school employee has to have a background check as well as fingerprinting, or just a background check?
So a public school employee that needs a background check for their school district, they would have to, communicate with the school district about that and not OEC. But if they also need an OEC background check, they would need to complete the full OEC background check. And as I said, for our purposes, we need to have all the information confirmed in BCIS that they completed an OEC background check. And it may be that other entities would accept the background check that was completed for OEC, but we're not able to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, I see another question. Who submits the fingerprints? Is it the program administrator in BCIS?
So the fingerprints need to be submitted through a live scan fingerprinting device, and that can be done through United Way, 211 childcare, or at a police department. And when the individual who needs a background check logs into BCIS and goes through the steps that we looked at, so on this screen here, when they get the correct service code and go to the state police website, CCHRS, once they enter their information there, then they'll be in the state police system, so that when they go to a police department or to 211 childcare with their applicant tracking number, that will link their fingerprints to their information that's in our database, and that's how we get the results from the state police. So it's submitted all electronically and connected to the information that they enter in the state police system when they get that applicant tracking number.
I see another question. If someone is coming from another OEC program, can we use?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so actually I forgot to cover that when we were looking at the program administrator view in BCIS, but not only can you have multiple locations as an administrator, but also a person, a staff member, can be on multiple rosters. So when you're an administrator and you go to add someone to your roster, if they've already completed their background check for a different program and they already have a current status in our system, then you can add them to your roster and they don't need a background check at that time because they're already they've already completed their background check within the past 5 years. There is another step that's being added to the system to confirm that there has not been more than 180 days separation from childcare, because if you leave childcare for more than 180 days, then you would need a background check to return. So that's also an enhancement that is being added currently.
One other question, Mike. Once they are printed, is there any other action they take in their account or just wait results?
Yeah, once they've submitted those forms, these DCF forms and FBI forms, and submitted their fingerprints, that's all the information that we need. And then the criminal background check is processed by the state police. The DCF check is processed by DCF, and those results come back to the OEC. And then if there are any other state checks that are required, we reach out to those states, or in some cases we need to reach out to the staff member because some states require the request to come directly from the individual. So depending on the state and the agency, we'll provide that information accordingly and get those out-of-state checks processed. So that would be the example where some more information might be needed if there is a check needed in another state that requires the request to come directly from the individual. And then another example is if there is some information that comes back in the background check, whether it's a criminal history or DCF history, then we reach out to the individual to get some more information and review that to determine if the person is disqualified from working in childcare. And there's more information about that on our website as well. We have a list of certain convictions that would be reviewed further if that's part of the person's criminal history. Can show where that is on the website as well. So on the background checks overview page, we have a link to the list of Connecticut convictions that are reviewed further. That's available on the website as well.
Great, thanks, Mike.
Sure.
I think that is the last question.
That was the last question, yes.
Great. All right, well, thank you everyone for attending this afternoon. And as I said, any questions, please reach out to us through the support center, or you can contact us in the legal division of OEC.
Thank you, everyone.